we're also deeply grateful for their fearless leader, Wes Trevor. Yes. We've spent a lot of time. He's not only a youth pastor, he's not only pastor to other people outside of youth, but he's also the leader of the interns, and so we're grateful for him. If you've been here over the past few months, you know that we've just came off of a series called The Simple Gospel as we marched through Romans 1 through 11. And one of the things that we said was that if we were to look at the events of Christ's life, the message of the Simple Gospel is this, that Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. And now we're at a strategic point in the letter to the Romans. And we get to chapter 12. And the first word in chapter 12 is therefore, which means that everything that has happened ahead of time has been talking about who we are in Christ, who we're called to be in our identity as sons and daughters of the King. And then therefore, in chapter 12 is a hinge point that says, in light of everything that took place before, this is then how you should live your life. And so we're going into a series now called Love in Action, that in light of everything that Christ has done on our behalf, things that we could not do in and of ourselves, we have been changed, transformed from the inside out. Therefore, in light of that reality, then let's go out living a life of love in action. And the reason why this is so significant is because as we look at the culture in which we live, one of the dominant narratives that comes out in our culture is my needs. I will make decisions for my life based upon my needs. So what job am I going to take? One that's based on my needs. What person am I going to marry? The one that fits and fulfills most of my needs. What kind of community am I going to connect into? One that meets my needs. How am I going to select my friends? One that's friends that are based upon my needs. So oftentimes we look at our life based through the vision or the lens of what meets my needs. Now the danger is that can seep its way into the church, and so people choose a church based upon my needs. What kind of church am I going to go to? One that preaches and meets my needs. That the music meets my needs. The youth, the children's, and all of the different ministries, they meet my needs. And pretty soon everything becomes all about me. And what Jesus says is, I've delivered you from you, that you are not at the center of your universe. I am. And the reason why this is so significant is because when we go into this section of Scripture, Romans chapter 12, verses 3 through 8, we will see that each and every person is critical for the body of Christ. Every person is important within the body of Christ to serve the community, to reach out to others. That the first question isn't what meets my needs. The first question is how can I leverage the things that have been gifted to me because of grace and use for service to others. It's a different mindset. It's a game changer. It's a different way of thinking about life. How can I use the things that have been entrusted to me because of His grace for the purpose of serving others? And the ironic thing is if we go into a community saying, I'm going to go out into a community to meet my needs, or the reason why I'm going into community is to receive community, we won't get community. However, if we go into community not looking at seeing what I can get out of community, but seeing what I could give to the community, what we get is community. It's ironic. It's a paradox. If I go to a community looking and longing to get connected, and that's the only reason why I'm going into the community, I won't be connected. However, if I go into the community looking to see how I can serve the community, I get connected. I want to feel significant. I want to have a purpose. And if I go into a community looking for significance, I won't get significance. However, if I go into a community recognizing I have gifts to be able to serve others, then what I get is a plus, is significance. So what we're going to be looking at here this morning is the fact that we are all important. We've all been gifted to serve. We have all been called to serve a particular kind of community, a body. Now, as we look at this section on Romans chapter 12, verses 3 through 8, we're going to see that not only have we been gifted, but we also have to see three significant things. The first is that we need to have His perspective. We need to have the right perspective. Second, we need to have the right place. That if we're going to exercise our gifts to others, for others, we need to understand the place by which those gifts are to operate. And lastly, the pattern. As we look at the list of these gifts, there's a particular pattern that begins to emerge. So, in light of all the spiritual gifts that He has given us as a community, what's the perspective? What's the place? And then lastly, what's the pattern? Okay. If you have your scriptures, Romans chapter 12, and we're going to look at verses 3 through 8. First, what is the perspective? For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Now, what's interesting is this word, he says, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Now, that word in the original language is one word, hyperthink. Don't hyperthink of yourself. And there's two ways to hyperthink. You can either think really high of yourself, or in other words, you can have a high self-esteem, or you can have a really low self-esteem. But either way, the common denominator of a low self-esteem and a high self-esteem is self. That's the common denominator. So there's a lot of different ways that we can think low about ourselves. Maybe you're in the place where you, maybe mid-40s, mid-50s, and you had all these dreams and aspirations. I mean, what is midlife crisis? Having all of these dreams when you were young, having all of these visions for your life, and then you get to about 50 or 60 and you realize, I'm not going to fulfill 7% of those things. That's midlife crisis. So I have a low self-esteem. Maybe some people here who you just thought you were going to marry Prince Charming, and Prince Charming never came along. Or you thought you married Prince Charming, and he didn't turn out to be Prince Charming. The first service I said that, my wife said, amen. But you had all these expectations and all these dreams and this vision for a particular kind of life, and you realize those things aren't going to pan out the way you thought that they were going to pan out. And so as a result, there's this low self-esteem that settles in your own heart. But the problem with that is the focus is on the self. What about high self-esteem? Let's say you have all the visions and the aspirations of what you want to do in life, and you accomplish those things, and you have a high self-esteem. But the problem is still the same, whether it's low or whether it's high. The problem is that you're hyper-thinking about yourself. You're overthinking about yourself. So then what does he say? Instead of hyper-thinking, what you need to do, what we are called to do, is have sober judgment. Again, verse 3. But rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. What does it mean to be sober? Not drunk. To be sober means you have an accurate view of life. It means that you think through things in a right way. You're grounded in what is reality. And so to be sober-minded about yourself means that you're grounded in the reality of who you are, how you've been created, and how you've been redeemed. To be sober-minded means you have an accurate perspective of who you are. And what does it mean to be sober-minded as a Christian? We recognize two things, is that we come to the Lord and we come to others with both humility and confidence. Why? Because to be sober-minded recognizes the work that Christ has done on our behalf. We see that we are sinners. We have an accurate view of ourselves. We know that we've sinned. We know that we've fallen short of God's glory. We know that we're not only all sinners, but we're also all broken. And as we look to the cross of Christ, we see the extravagance of his love for us, that he has redeemed us because of our sin. And so because of that, we recognize that we're humble. But we also recognize that we have confidence because of the extravagance of his love expressed to us, for us on the cross. So there's a humble confidence about us. But it's not by looking at self. It's by looking at what he's done on our behalf. Be sober-minded. Be sober-minded. And you see that. The faith God has distributed to each of you. Now, that word literally means in accordance. It's metron in the original language. It's where we get the word meter. What he's not saying in accordance with the faith, that is to say, here's a person that has 3 ounces of faith, and here's a person that has 5 ounces of faith, and this person is more acceptable because they have 5 over this person that has 3. He's not saying that at all. He's saying in view, in accordance with the faith that's been handed down to you by the apostles and the prophets, that has been distributed according to each of you. The faith that has been done, the work that has been done on your behalf. The faith, the work that Christ has done. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again for you. So in light of that, you're measured as one of being saved, as one of being delivered, as one of being who's been redeemed. So in light of that, that's how we need to view our life. And that's the perspective that we have to have going into understanding our giftings. Now, the reason why this is so important is he starts off by saying, this is who you are in Christ, before he launches into, this is now what you're called to do. He talks about our identity. This is your perspective on who you are. Then he launches into the gifts and what has been given. Now, the reason why that's so important is because we have to first understand who we are, and we talked about this last week, the indicative, the identity, before we talk about the imperative, what we're called to do. Now, the reason why this is significant is especially as we understand the spiritual gifts and the spiritual fruits. Those are very different. And if we confuse those two, it's to our own demise. We cannot confuse spiritual giftedness with spiritual fruit. The body of Christ, we are all called to have the spiritual fruit, all of the spiritual fruit. We can't say, well, I have patience, but I don't have love. I'm very kind, but I don't have any joy. They're all called to grow up collectively in our hearts. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. They all grow up and we all possess those. If you've given your life to Christ, you have spiritual fruit. But spiritual fruit is different than spiritual giftedness. To be spiritually gifted, you have particular gifts. Not every one person, I would say not every one church possesses all of the gifts. So we all have different gifts for the purpose of building up the body. So not every one person has all the gifts. And spiritual giftedness is different than spiritual fruit. Now that's important, especially if you have a speaking gift or if you have a leading gift. Because somebody could be operating in their gifts, the gifts that God had given them, and yet their heart is cold. They're not walking in the gifts. I could give you situation after situation of people who are incredibly gifted oratorically, who can speak really well. I know a lot of people who could just lead really well. They can organize, administrate, cast vision, move a lot of people in a particular direction, incredibly gifted in ministry. And yet, for one point of their life, they fell. And during that time, it seemed like there was a lot of fruit happening in their ministry. In fact, there was one person who said that while he was in a situation of sin, he was operating on his gifts, and he would have people come up to him and say, "You must be so holy, because look at your giftings. You must be so close to God because look at the gifting and how you're exercising the gift that God has given you." What's happening? We're confusing spiritual gifts with spiritual fruit. And what Paul says here is that we need to have the right perspective. We need to be sober in our understanding of ourselves, not hyperthink about ourselves, but we look at what he has done on our behalf. And so therefore, we approach the gifts with humility, but also with confidence. That's the perspective. Second, what's the place of the gifts? And that's found in verses 4 and 5. For just as each of us has one body with many members, he's using the body as an illustration, these members do not all have the same function. So in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. He's saying that we are one body, and that's the image that he uses. That we are a church, and the place that the spiritual gifts get used primarily are in the church for the purpose of building up one another. That we are connected with one another. We're not sewn together. We're grown together. And just like I can't take off a finger and say, well, that's really not a part of my body. So also, we just can't remove ourselves from the body and say, well, I'm not really a part of the body. If you've given your life to Christ, you're grown inside of the body. And I recognize that there's something afoot in the culture in which we live that says this: I love Jesus. I want to follow Jesus, but not in the church. I don't like the church, but I love Jesus. I love what Christ is and who he is for me, but I don't like the Christ people. I don't like the church. And Christ will have none of it because Jesus died for the church. He died for us. He gave himself up for her, for us, for the church. So we're called to be a body, growing together, ministering together. Now, when we come together as the body, there's two things that happen. The first is this, is that we grow in our relationship with the Lord, and then we also find our significance in the context of the body. The first is that we grow together. When we are connected to the body, that's when we experience spiritual growth. Again, in the love and the joy and the peace and reconciliation and kindness and goodness. When we grow in the Lord, it's because we've been connected to the body. Just like the members, you can't cut off the hand and for it to continue to grow. The hand will cease to grow as soon as it's been removed from the body. If you take off a leg, the leg will cease to grow when it's been removed from the body. So also, if we remove ourselves from the body, we cease to grow. It's only as connected to the body that we continue to grow in the things that God has called for us. So growth. Second thing is that we understand our significance. That we all have a part to play in a gift that is given. And when it's used in the context of the body, we recognize our significance within the body. Paul will say in 1 Corinthians 12, he'll say, can the eyeball tell the ear, I don't need you? I mean, first of all, how would the eyeball even say that without being a mouth? I mean, that doesn't make sense. But can one part of the body tell the other part of the body, you're not important, you're not needed? He says, imagine if everybody was an eyeball. Imagine if everybody in here was a big old eyeball, and that was the church. And you had a big old eyeball walking around. Well, he couldn't walk around because he didn't have legs. But that's gross. But what's beautiful is that when each piece of the body does its part, when there's an eye and there's an ear and there's a nose, that each person has a part to play. The brain is great, but it can't scratch your nose. The fingers are great, but it can't think. Legs are great, but they can't breathe and put oxygen in your body. Lungs are great, but they can't make you walk. Every part of the body is important, and so are you. You have a gift, and you have a gift that is meant to be used in the context of the body, and as you engage in that gift, the body is built up until we all reach unity in Christ. One of the things that has been such a blessing over the past year is, I'd say this has probably been the highlight of this past year for me, is when at the conclusion of a youth group, we had the 9 kids, 1 boy, 8 girls, graduating from this youth group. And they each went down the line. They just shared about what Wellspring had meant to them. And some talked about children's education, some talked about youth pastors, some talked about different mentors within this body. And it was just astounding to me to recognize that as a result of the gifting of this body and people using their gift, that we were able to launch out 9 people into college. I thought, man, that's the body doing its part. That when we're connected to the body, we find our significance and meaning. I mean, if you have a hand that's attached to the arm and you extend it out, that's an action of hospitality and warmth and invitation. However, if you have the hand disconnected from the body, put in a formaldehyde jar, and you give that to somebody, that's gross. Why? Because it's been disconnected from the body. But if it's connected to the hand, it's a sign of warmth and hospitality and invitation. As you connect to the body, you find your significance, your meaning, and your purpose. A couple weeks ago, my daughter, who we launched out into college, first call that I received from her was on a Sunday. And she said, Dad, I've called you to tell you about my church experience. Oh my goodness. It was remarkable. And I was thinking about like all the things that this church had done when she was in nursery, when she was in Christian education, when she was in youth group, and she had a mentor, and all the things that this church had done. This wasn't just an initiative from her parents. This was a whole community initiative. And I thought, man, I was so grateful for this church. And then she said that she went to a church. She said, you know what I miss most about Wellspring, Dad? I said, the preaching. She said, no, not even close. What I miss, because at the church what they did was they had communion stations up front. And you can kind of go up to the communion anytime you wanted to. Whenever you felt like it, you could just come up and get communion. She says, I miss the liturgy and all of us repenting together, all of us confessing our sin, all of us praying together, engaging in the liturgy. And I miss all coming forward together as the body to receive the bread and the wine. Just that's what I miss, is being together with my family, with my community. Oh, that's the church doing its part. That's the body being the body. And listen, if you have a lead gift, we need you. If you have a serving gift, we need you. If you have a speaking gift, we need you. We need every person in this place doing their part, utilizing the gifts that God has given you for the purpose of serving the body. And we have a great opportunity in this next season that we are in as a church. Last service, we had over 78 kids at church. We have a tremendous gift that God has given this community and all of these kids that are 5th grade and under. A quarter of our church is made up of that population. But you know what else is a little bit sad? Is that there's only an 1/8 of this congregation that is involved in one degree or another within children's ministry. That means that the gift is 1/4, but how we're stewing that is 1/8. And I want to challenge us as a congregation that God has given us a gift of these children. And as I look at how we sent off these kids after high school, and they're calling back, and they're talking about their relationship with the Lord, and they're talking about them going to church, I mean, that is such an opportunity. We have a vision to see disciples made that are characterized by worship, formation, mission. There is no greater mission field and opportunity to make disciples than with these young people that God has gifted this congregation with. We have an opportunity to make disciples with these people that God has gifted us. such an opportunity. When we baptize every person, we say, will you be responsible for seeing that the child you present is brought up in the Christian faith and life? And what do we all say? We will. We've adopted this child through baptism into this family. When we baptize a child, they're being adopted into this family, so we all have a part to play. We all have an opportunity. The statistics say this, that 40 to 80% of the kids that leave high school and go into college will never step foot in a church again. They will turn their back on Jesus and they will go the other way. That statistic of 40 to 80%, depending upon where you live, can go down to 25% if two things are present. One is if that child is involved in the life of the church. And two, that child has a mentor. If there's somebody else that they can go to, and that we as a congregation are doing everything that we can to provide what the parents need to be the primary disciples of their children, and then to come alongside of them as mentors, as prayer warriors, it's the body doing the work of the body, to doing the work of the kingdom. And in so doing, we will see disciples being made. This is an opportunity that we all have. So, we have a perspective, we have a place, and lastly, there's a pattern. There's a pattern to these gifts, and it's found in verses 6 through 8. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. It is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is encouraging, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Now, what all the commentators will say is that this list of gifts is not exhaustive, that there's 3 other places in the New Testament where the gifts are mentioned. In Ephesians 4, 1 Peter 4, and then also in 1 Corinthians 12. And what they will say is that these gifts are not exhaustive, that the gifts that God has given his church are as expansive and as creative as God himself. That each person has a unique gift. But what's interesting about these gifts, not only these, but also the ones that are mentioned in the other parts of the New Testament, is that they generally fall under 3 categories. And if we as a body, the body of Christ, are to represent Christ here on church or on earth as ambassadors of Christ, if we are to represent him, who is Jesus? He is the prophet, he is the priest, and he is the king. He is the ultimate king because he's bringing a kingdom. He's the ultimate prophet because he not only speaks the word of God, he is the word of God. And he's the ultimate priest because he not only gives a sacrifice, he is the sacrifice. So the work and the ministry of Jesus on earth was one of a prophet, one of a priest, and one as a king. In other words, he led, he served, and he spoke. And if you look at all of the different gifts, they fall under one of those 3 headings. There's speaking gifts, there's leading gifts, and there's serving gifts. The question becomes, is how has God wired you to serve the church? When we are all doing our part, we represent something of Christ that nothing else does. That when we exercise our gifts in the church, that we connect the dots and give the world a visual in such a way that nothing else does. And I've used this before, but if you've ever seen the connect the dots thing, where you begin to go from 1 to 2 and you connect those things and you begin to see an image and you first think, oh, it's an elephant. No, it's a mouse. It's a giraffe. No, it's a book. But you kind of finish it all up and then the picture finally pops out and you go, that's what it is. Of course it's a book. I didn't see it. I thought it was an elephant, but it's a book. What allows you to see the image? Because all the dots get connected. Each person in here is a dot. And when you use the gifts that God has given you, the dots get connected and we reveal an image of Christ to the world that cannot be revealed in any other way. The church is the hope for the world. And as we use our gifts to serve others, the church will be built up. And I just want to say this. As I've just been thinking about it and praying about this passage over the past week, the story that came to mind was in John chapter 21. And in John chapter 21, it's right after Simon Peter had denied Jesus. It was in the moment where Jesus needed him the most. It was in the moment where he needed his disciples the most. And the disciples abandoned him. As they all went the other way, Peter found himself out in a courtyard and he denied Jesus 3 times. But then after Jesus died and after the resurrection, Jesus once again visits Peter. And then he asks him a question. He says, Peter, do you love me? He says, Lord, you know me. Yes, I love you. Jesus says, feed my sheep. He asks him again, do you love me? Peter says, you know that I love you, Lord. Jesus says, then feed my lambs. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. And feed my sheep. 3 times, the same number in which Peter had denied Jesus. 3 times, so to say this, that Peter, I am restoring you unto ministry. Now go forth and feed my sheep. Use the gifts that I have given you for the purpose of building up the body. He restores them. And as I was thinking about that story, and also for us as a church, it came to mind this truth, that it's oftentimes in the moments of greatest fear that God's greatest grace is revealed. It's in the moments, like Peter, of our greatest struggles, sufferings, difficulties, moments in life that we were most ashamed, that we saw God's grace come. And it's in those moments that God will leverage for the purpose of building up others. It's God's grace coming into those moments that we want to hide from God and hide from others. That God leverages those moments and reaches out and touches hearts that only you can touch in that moment. And holds hands that only you can hold because you have gone through that situation or season in life. Each person in this place has been gifted. You have been gifted to serve. Let's pray.